welcome to the conversation on the TYT network. Well, the issue of freedom of the press has been one that is pretty gigantic throughout the Trump administration. It's also a very large issue under Obama as well. Now we're gonna have a new administration, although Trump also thinks that's fake news. He might come to find out on January 20th that it isn't. But we want to bring on Joel Simon, who's the executive director of the Committee to Protect Journalists, to have a conversation about this. So Joel, welcome to the Young Turks.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be on with you.
Absolutely, great to have you on. So Joel, there's a lot of elements to this. First, let's talk about the damage that was done internationally by Trump, constantly calling all the media fake news for these last 5 years.
You know, I think that's the nature of the way we tend to look at these issues through a very domestically focused lens. And there's no question that Trump's rhetoric has undermined public confidence in the media, undermined public confidence in experts. It's undermined our democracy, frankly, but it's actually done much more damage globally. And let me explain why. Because the Trumpian rhetoric of fake news, of enemies of the people, that has been embraced by authoritarian leaders around the world. And we've seen record numbers, for example, of journalists imprisoned around the world. We've seen new fake news laws implemented by various governments. You may have even seen these press conferences with Trump, with Vladimir Putin, or other leaders, and they make a joke about fake news and do you have that problem in your country? And Putin nods knowingly, yes, we have that problem in our country. And all the journalists in Russia know exactly what that means. Trump might be using rhetoric, but in Russia, if you get crosswise with Putin, things could go very badly.
Yeah. So great, empowering dictators throughout the world. So
that's what goes. Yeah.
Yep, super frustrating. And look, I don't think it takes so much courage to be in media in America, but and unfortunately, a lot of folks don't even clear that bar. So I have plenty of critique of the media in America myself, but not in these ridiculous enemy of the state kind of talk. But in terms of the rest of the world, journalists are some of the bravest people on the planet. You're going to be a journalist in Russia and point out what Putin's doing wrong. You're playing with your life. That is unbelievable bravery. Also in China and so many other places. And he's done great damage to those people. There's one last piece of irony before we move on to Biden. So he screams at how he's going to shut down all these media outlets, Jeff Bezos's Washington Post, the social media outlets, etc. And then turns around and says he's an advocate, he's a big champion of free speech. Joel, has it been dispiriting to see that half this country cannot see the massive, gigantic hypocrisy of those statements?
Yeah, well, look, yes, of course, it's dispiriting. But I tend to, again, Trump has sort of tapped in to the hostility that already exists towards the media, to the mistrust of experts, to the sense that, the media reflects the perspective of elites, et cetera, et cetera. And he's tapped into that, but that's not unique. I mean, we're seeing that kind of backlash. We saw it in Venezuela. We see it in Russia. We've seen it in Turkey. Autocratic leaders, populists, Hungary, Poland, in many countries around the world, they're able to mobilize the public against the media by presenting this narrative. And so Trump has tapped into it in this country. But again, I can't help but see this from a global perspective. And the US has been certainly an imperfect but an important champion of press freedom and the rights of journalists, and that is gone. That is gone, and it means that there's accelerated crackdowns in Egypt and the Philippines and so many countries around the world where, as you say, Cenk, it really takes so much courage to go out and report the news. And I think that should be inspiring and humbling for journalists in this country, frankly.
Yeah, 100%. So let me turn to the journalists in this country, because I think part of what happened here was that they enabled this. And they enabled it in two different ways. And so number one was this unwillingness to do anything that isn't neutral. So he said, she said is already damaging to journalism to begin with, because I don't care what he said or she said, I care what actually happened. And so there's a massive difference between objectivity, which is telling you what happened, and neutrality, which is telling you, I can't tell what happened. I'm just gonna say the Democrats say this and the Republicans say that. That privileged lies and put it on an equal footing with the truth. It was political correctness. And number two, Joel, in my opinion, they are a lot. Let me put it this way: almost everyone on cable news is elitist. They're almost all multimillionaires. They think that anything outside of the status quo is an abomination, and so they privileged corporate Republicans and corporate Democrats for decades. So, as much as I hate to see the press being attacked overall, I'm part of the press. I run a media network. I think the mainstream media opened themselves up to this attack, and so I'm curious what your take on that is here in America.
Look, I think it's so varied. I mean, everyone likes to talk about the media. I don't even know what that means. There's so many different kinds of media. There's cable news, there's blogs, there's website, there's social media, there's citizen journalists, there's so many different kinds of things. I think your critique is valid when it's applied towards certain media outlets, certain journalists. Fine, everyone's got their critique. But I think overall, there's actually been some incredible accountability reporting and investigative reporting during the Trump administration. It's been advantaged by the fact that the White House leaks like a sieve. He's trying to keep secrets that journalists are ferreting out. So first of all, I think there's been some remarkable reporting that we have to acknowledge. The second point I want to make, Cenk, is that freedom of the press, freedom of speech. There's no guarantee that people will use that speech responsibly or use it for the right purposes. You see governments like the government of Singapore making that argument. Like, if people are irresponsible in the way that they use speech, well, we've got to curtail it. We've got to, the government has to intervene and actually control and manage what people say. Thankfully, that doesn't exist in this country. And so we have a lot of media that, perhaps people disagree with. That's all fine and good. But I think the one thing that we have to keep in mind is that we would have none of this, and we wouldn't even have the potential to correct ourselves and to improve the situation if we didn't have the basic freedoms. And that's not something that Trump believes. And that is something that he would, if he had the opportunity, I believe, and he indicated this on many occasions, and he attempted to actually restrict the work of the media, certainly to intimidate journalists. Thankfully, I don't think he was successful, but I think that was his intent in many instances. And I think that's something we have to repudiate and reject.
Yeah, 100% agreed on that. So now let's talk about the Democrats. So Obama was not particularly good on freedom of the press. That's a massive understatement. So let me let you do your job. What did Obama get wrong when it came to the press?
Well, we did the Committee to Protect Journalists, the organization. I think we did a major report in 2013 called the Obama Administration of the Press, and we really laid out. It was written by Leonard Downey Jr. is the former executive editor of the Washington Post, so he's seen a few things, and he actually opined that the Obama administration was the most secretive administration he'd seen since the Nixon administration. So the Obama administration. First of all, I do want to note that President Obama spoke in very positive ways about the importance of freedom of the press, and he talked a good game, and that's not insignificant. That's not unimportant when you think about what Trump's done. And it's also his foreign policy was generally, I can also be critical, but was generally supportive of press freedom. Where I fault him and where we're highly critical is, one, he was highly controlling. He was obsessed with leaks. He was not transparent. He managed the agencies and the departments in such a way that it was very difficult for journalists to get access to senior officials and get on the record interviews. So he made that very difficult. And his Justice Department prosecuted leakers systematically. In fact, during the Obama administration, the Espionage Act, which was a very restrictive law passed in 1917, which was initially intended to obviously suppress espionage, was actually used to go after people who leaked information to the press. So there were a lot of policies that the Obama administration followed, which were antithetical to press freedom. We were critical, and we called him out on that.
Yeah, using the Espionage Act against journalists was unreal. It opened a very ugly door, which Trump walked through pretty clearly. But he also did things like calling the leader of Yemen and asking that he continue to classify a journalist there that exposed that we had bombed a wedding as a terrorist and keep him in jail longer. So I think Obama, it's fair to say, in my opinion, was terrible when it comes to freedom of the press. So I'm a little bit harsher than you are on that. But last thing here.
Fair enough.
Yeah, and Biden will probably do almost the exact same thing that Obama did. So last thing here, I'm curious what you think of the Julian Assange situation. So there's been this artificial divide where the rest of the press say, "Oh, please, I do declare he's not approved by us, so you can jail him any way you like." And now I'm oversimplifying, definitely hyperbole, right? But what do you think of the Assange situation? Has his journalism been criminalized?
I mean, look, I think we're obsessed with this whole debate about, is Julian Assange a journalist or is he not a journalist? Does he follow like journalistic ethics or not? I mean, I think we could debate that round or square. I actually don't consider him a journalist. I consider him a kind of, anti-secrecy activist, if you want to call him that. But that's really irrelevant. The real question is, what is the impact on press freedom if he's prosecuted under the Espionage Act for making public classified information that the US government has determined is classified? Think about the implications of that. If the US government can determine that making public information that it deems classified is a crime, and people who do that are subject to prosecution and could face long jail sentences, then journalism is effectively criminalized. And not only that, they're internationalizing the prosecution, because Julian Assange is not in the United States. He's facing extradition from the UK. So what that essentially means is that any journalist anywhere in the world who publishes classified information could at least theoretically be prosecuted under the Espionage Act and extradited to the United States to face those charges. That is an incredibly dangerous precedent for press freedom, for the work of journalists, and it really doesn't matter what you think of Julian Assange, whether you like him or hate him. If you're a journalist and you care about press freedom, you should be very, very concerned about this prosecution and this attempt to extradite him to the United States.
Yeah, again, I agree 100% there. Look, my opinion is that all journalists should be anti-secrecy activists of some sort. You're trying to get information from the government to give us more transparency, and there are definitely things that I've publicly disagreed with Julian Assange on. But as you point out, that is totally irrelevant. Trying to prosecute him for what he's revealed about governments is outrageous and an awful precedent. So, all right, Joel Simon, Executive Director of Committee to Protect Journalists. Thank you so much for joining us and for being an activist to protect media overall throughout the world. We appreciate that.
It's been such a pleasure to be on with you. Thank you so much for the invitation.
On the go? Don't worry, we got you covered. You can still listen to TYT at our new podcast network. Find us on Apple Podcasts, the Google Play Store, or at tyt.com/podcast.